Hi, and welcome to chapter 18 of Literal to Living. Today, we're going to be looking at Genesis chapter 25. Get my notebook turned on here. Genesis chapter 25. Let's see, verse 1 through 34. We're going to look at Genesis 25 in its entirety. Not very long. Before we get started, let us have a quick word of prayer. God, I thank you for another opportunity to learn more about you through the study of your word. As always, I pray for wisdom, I pray for clarity, and I pray for understanding. In Jesus' name, amen. This is by far, my favorite time of the day. I'm a little behind. I should have done this already, but it has been such a busy time. Every time I intend to record sooner, for whatever reason, it just doesn't happen, but I'm working on it. Chapter 18. All right, got my notebook ready. Okay, I read from the English Standard Version. We're going to jump in it. Abraham took another wife, whose name was Keturah. She bore him Zimran, Jokshan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. Jokshan fathered Sheba and Dedan. The sons of Dedan were Ashurim, Ledisham, and Leumim. The sons of Midian were Ephah, Hanok, Abida, and Eldah. All these were the children of Keturah. Abraham gave all he had to Isaac, but to the sons of his concubines, Abraham gave gifts. And while he was still living, he sent them away from his son Isaac eastward toward the east country. These are the days of the years of Abraham's life, 175 years. Abraham breathed his last and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. Isaac and Ishmael, his sons, buried him in the cave of Machpelah, in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar, the Hittite, east of Mamre, the field that Abraham purchased from the Hittites. There Abraham was buried with his wife, with Sarah, his wife. After the death of Abraham, God blessed Isaac, his son, and Isaac settled at Beer Lahai Roi. These are the generations of Ishmael, Abraham's son, whom Hagar, the Egyptian, Sarah's servant, bore to Abraham. Sometimes I wish I would just read ahead and maybe listen and be ready for these names. I probably should have looked up about 15 of these names. These are the names of the sons of Ishmael, named in the order of, we know it's going to be 12 because we read that previously that there was going to be 12 princes. These are the names of the sons of Ishmael, named in the order of their birth. Nebaioth, the firstborn of Ishmael, and Kedar, Adbeel, Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, Massa, Hadad, Tema, not Timu, but Tema, Jeter, Naphish, and Kedemah. These are the sons of Ishmael, and these are their names by their villages and by their encampments, 12 princes according to their tribes. These are the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years. He breathed his last and died, and was gathered to his people. They settled from Havilah to Shur, which is opposite Egypt in the direction of Assyria. He settled over against all his kinsmen. These are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham fathered Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Paddan Aram, the sister of Laban, the Aramean, to be his wife. And Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren. And the Lord granted his prayer, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. Oh, that's the end of a sentence. And the Lord granted his prayer, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. The children struggled together within her, and she said, "If it is thus, why is this happening to me?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other. The older shall serve the younger." When her days to give birth were completed, behold, there were twins in her womb. The first came out red, all his body like a hairy cloak. So they called his name Esau. Afterward, his brother came out with his hand holding Esau's heel. So they called his name Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man, dwelling in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Once when Jacob was cooking stew, Esau came in from the field, and he was exhausted. And Esau said to Jacob, "Let me eat some of that red stew, for I am exhausted." Therefore, his name was called Edom. Jacob said, "Sell me your birthright now." Esau said, "I'm about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me?" Jacob said, "Swear to me now." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. Interesting. A lot of interesting things happening. This last thing that was looked at is interesting. I've read this several times before, but just looking at Esau, telling him, what use is my birthright to me? Swear to me now. So he swore to him and sold his birthright. And Jacob gave, Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went his way. And then he despised his birthright. From there, it's kind of crazy. Like, he literally gave up his birthright because he was hungry. But this is the part that's interesting to me, right? Who was his father? Who is the father of Esau? It's Isaac. He knows who his father is. His father is Isaac. If Jacob knows anything of his father Isaac, then Esau surely knows of his father Isaac as well. I'm sure they knew of their father Abraham as well. I'm sure their father likely told them about the promise that's potentially that was told to Abraham. Now, I know it's going to be later that God is going to give that same promise to Isaac, but it was Isaac who was strapped down, about to be sacrificed. And the angel of the Lord said, "Stop. You haven't even withheld your son from me. So now I know, you're here for me. You'll do anything for me." When he saw that ram in the thicket, in the bush. The point I'm making here is Esau is a son of Isaac. His granddaddy was Abraham, the father of the faith. Why is he like, this is crazy? For some red stew, you talking about your birthright, but you forgetting the God that's favoring y'all. Like, that's the part that's crazy to me. So I know I ain't trying to be high and mighty, and I know this is all hindsight, but I'm just thinking to myself, if I was living right around that time, let me see. Does it say? So Abraham was 175. Isaac and Ishmael buried him. Isaac was 40 when he had these twins. So I guess they've grown up now. So it's possible that Abraham is dead now. you know. Sometimes the Bible doesn't give us the privilege of knowing how much time has elapsed. It just gives us these dates. I mean, like it says, Abraham lived 175 years. It says Ishmael lived 137 years and he died. Well, is Ishmael still alive right now while this is happening with Jacob and Esau in this bean stew? I don't know. Is Abraham still alive with this birthright situation? I think Abraham is probably dead by the time God is going to give the promise to Isaac, because why would he give the promise to Isaac if Abraham is still alive? But when the kids were born, when the twins were born, I don't know what the time frame was from when the kids were born up until eventually when he's going to give the promise to Isaac. So it's always interesting to me just trying to understand time frame when time frame isn't given. But again, Esau is like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Like, he's the brother of Israel. He's the brother of Jacob. So that means he knew who his daddy was. He knew who his granddaddy was. Or at least I'm thinking he did. So that's why this is crazy to me. All right, so short story, Abraham died. Abraham took another wife after Sarah died. Those first couple kids that he had, we started out real easy with Abraham. Even Hagar, kind of easy, right? You had Isaac, you had Ishmael, right? Then you got into some Keturah, some Zimran, some Jokshan, some Medan, some Midian, like Ashur. You got into some names around here, and I ain't saying that nothing's wrong with these names, because these are names that they used back then. So, names meant something. So I'm just used to these American names because I'm in America. But just hard for me to pronounce some of these names because it's just not what I'm used to. He died. He was buried in that same cave that Ephron tried to give him. And he said, no, you're not giving me anything. I'm going to pay for it because God has already given me this land. So you're not going to rewrite the future. God has already given it to me. So the story is not going to be, well, the Hittites gave me the promised land. No, God gave it to me. So in this moment, I'm going to go ahead and pay for it. But ultimately, it belongs to us anyway. Yeah. Bir Lahai Roy. That's where Isaac settled at. Now, interesting, when it talked about the fact that Isaac and Ishmael together, they buried their father. And if you weren't paying attention to it, that could creep up on you. But Beersheba, if you recall, back when Hagar and Ishmael were sent away, when they left, after the angel of the Lord came and, they found the well and Hagar was able to give Ishmael something to drink, it said they settled in Beersheba. So it literally was the same. They were all in the same town. Like, they weren't that far from each other. So they weren't in the same, in the immediate vicinity of each other, but they were in the same town. Like, Beersheba is where all of them were. That's crazy. So they literally grew up around the corner from one another. Like, one of them was on the north side and the other one was on the south side, or something like that, because they were together to bury their father. So that was interesting. I flipped too far ahead. So we see what's happening with the birth of Esau and Jacob. Got some struggling going on inside of her. This part is always interesting as well. How did they know that she was barren? How'd they know? Well, they had sex and they tried to get pregnant and it didn't happen. Isaac, I think it said, he was 40 years old and he was 60 years old when they finally had those kids. So for 20 years, it seems they were trying to have a baby. Because it said in verse 19 or in verse 20, Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, and Isaac prayed. I mean, it was all the same sentence. So if you look at starting at verse 19, these are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham fathered Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah. And then it listed out who Rebekah was to be his wife. And then the next one says, and Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren. And the Lord granted his prayer, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. But it said he was 60 when she bore these twins. The 60 minus 40 is 20. That was 20 years later. So, yeah, that's how you knew they was barren back then. You wasn't hooking nobody up to no machine. You wasn't doing no sperm counts and with none of that stuff. There's a couple of interesting things, though, that's going on. I think we've already talked enough about the situation with the field, the purchasing of the field, and all of that stuff. But I think this situation with the birth, possibly two principles here. Definitely with him selling his birthright, for sure. Maybe even three. Okay, so I got my notebook turned on. I need to write a couple things down just to get my thoughts together. So I will see you all on the other side of this note taking. All right. God gave me a couple bangers. Real simple. Real simple. They always real simple, but they always amazing to me because they always speak to my life. A couple things I realized I ain't talk about. This whole the fact that Jacob means he takes by the heel or he cheats. So I'm sorry for anybody out there that's named Jacob. You wanted a nice, strong biblical name, but your name means he cheats or he takes by the heel. Because it said in verse 25, the first came out red, his body like a hairy cloak, so they called his name Esau. Well, they called him Esau because of, red and hairy. Afterward, his brother came out with his hand holding Esau's heel. So his name was called Jacob. That's why his name means he takes by the heel. Crazy. Couple things that I want to mention before I get into this first point that I was thinking about as God was giving me this first point. Prayer, right? We saw that Isaac prayed for his wife. Then I was reminded of a couple things. I probably should have wrote them down. So we know what happened in Genesis, early in Genesis, with Cain and Abel. Cain killed Abel. After Cain killed Abel, and he was sent away, Adam and Eve had another child. His name was Seth. And people were, honoring God during that time. And the Bible says that people began to call on the name of the Lord, right? Prayer. When Sodom and Gomorrah was about to be destroyed, when the three men came by Abraham's spot, and he said, well, when he interceded on behalf of Sodom and Gomorrah, like, what if you find 50 there? What if you find 40 there? What if you just find 10? Will you spare them? He interceded. He prayed on behalf of Sodom and Gomorrah. And ultimately, because he prayed for them, it gave them an opportunity to go into the city square to be able to have met Lot there. And it led to Lot being saved as a result. I just closed my notes by accident. Abraham prayed for Abimelech's household. Now, it was Abraham's fault that he had to pray for Abimelech's household because, once again, Abraham said, she's my sister. So Abimelech took her in his house, and God made them all barren. And he told Abimelech in his dream This man's a prophet. He's going to pray for you. Let his wife go. He did. Abraham prayed for him. And then all the women were able to have kids. And then the coolest prayer, in my opinion, that happened up to this point, the coolest, I talked about this last week, was the fact that, and this could have been Eliezer. I'm not sure. It didn't mention a name. It just said one of Abraham's servants, the oldest in his house, was sent to go and get a wife for Isaac. So it could have been Eliezer. I don't remember if it mentioned his name. Could have been an Egyptian slave. And because of him watching Abraham and him witnessing Abraham's life and him witnessing the goodness of God in Abraham's life, by proxy, he prayed to God, not just praying to, like this other time, it said, people began to call on the name of the Lord back earlier, when Seth was born during that time. Didn't say they called on the name of the God of Abraham. This guy prayed to the God of Abraham. That's what I thought was cool, that he looked at the life of Abraham and saw how he was living, and then also looked at God and how God was favoring Abraham, and that caused him to believe in that God enough to then pray to who that God was. He didn't know him as Jehovah. He didn't know him as Yahweh. He didn't know any of those names, but he knew him as the God of Abraham. That I thought was a pretty cool reason to pray, and had enough umption to say, give me a specific sign. Don't just like point me in the general direction. Have her to say a specific thing to let me know. Yeah, that was pretty cool. But now, jumping into today, Isaac prayed for his wife. The point here is simple. Pray that God's will be fulfilled in your family or in your own life. Why do I say that? Thanks for asking. This prayer wasn't just about desire. It was more than that. Now, before I jump into that, let's go back. Well, I don't know if there was yes, I do know. If we go back to the previous chapter and we take a look, and it says in verse 58 of chapter 24, verse 58. And they called Rebekah and said to her, will you go with this man? She said, I will go. So they sent away Rebekah, their sister, and her nurse, and Abraham's servant and his men, and they blessed Rebekah and said to her. So at least one person went with Rebekah. Now, I don't know, because it didn't say, if Rebekah had a maid that went with her. Now, I don't know if this term, well, you know what? I'm not going to look it up. I don't know if, it was more to it than that, right? Because Sarah had a maid, and she gave her maid to Abraham, right? Isaac took the position of praying for his wife because she was barren. Sarah and Abraham took a different position, right? It's God's promise. Stop scheming and just trust him. That was a principle from back then, from another chapter of Little Road to Living. That's not what Isaac did. Isaac said, you know what? My wife is barren. I'm going to pray and I'm going to wait. That's why I said this prayer wasn't just about desire. It was more than that, because he didn't do what his father did. He knew what was going on. He knew who Ishmael was. He knew Ishmael was his brother. They buried their father together. He knew exactly who Ishmael was. But more importantly, Isaac knew that he was a part of the promise. What he also knew was that Rebekah was a part of the promise. So I say it was more than just about desire, because this was a fulfillment of the covenant. He was praying that God's will be fulfilled in their family by praying that his wife would be able to have a child. That's what he was praying for. That he was praying that God will fulfill that covenant that he promised through his father Abraham. I mentioned before I started taking my notes that I wasn't sure, 100% sure if Isaac knew about the covenant. Yeah, he knew about the covenant because I thought about it. He was circumcised. He knew why he was circumcised. All the people got circumcised because of the covenant, because of the Abrahamic covenant that was made. That's why they got circumcised, because of that covenant. That's exactly why they got circumcised. Isaac was one of those people that got circumcised as well because of that covenant that God made. That not just that they were going to give them the land, but they were going to multiply them. So Isaac knew what the promise was. He knew that he was a part of that promise, and he knew that Rebekah was a part of that promise as well. So he prayed for his wife. It wasn't just about desire. It was about praying that God's will be fulfilled in his family. He was being patient. He waited 20 years. Now, here's where God got me. Here's where God got me, right? How this applies to me in my life as a parent. Sometimes I get caught up in praying that my kids will be successful versus praying that their calling be fulfilled, right? I don't pray for that. That's not at all what I pray for. God showed me a long time ago, not an exact thing, but two of my kids, he showed me that they were going to have a very strong ministry, right? So you would think that would have been enough for me to pray that God would bring that to fruition and for God to, work on them and show us ways as parents so that we can help them to work towards that. No. I get caught up in the typical parent thing and looking at what's going on in the world and the sometimes elitist society that we live in that wants their kids to have this degree, that degree, so they can get this job, that job. And I focus so much sometimes on my kids being successful in the world's thought process and in the way that the world thinks, to where sometimes I just forget to pray that whatever God's calling is on their life, that it would be fulfilled in the same way that Isaac prayed for his wife because she was barren. And it's not just about, if you got kids, or it's not just about if you got a spouse, because sometimes we want to pray for easy stuff for people that's in our lives, when really God desires for us to be healthy. We should pray for that for our family. God desires for us to grow. We should pray for that for our family. God has given us purpose. We should pray for that we work towards meeting that purpose. God desires for us to have peace. We should pray for that for our family instead of just praying for the easy stuff. Give me a job. Give me a car. Give me a house. Cool. Those things are cool. Got it. I understand. I'm not saying don't pray for those things. But we should also pray for those things that's God's will for our life as well, because in doing so, those other things get added along the way, because sometimes that peace is shelter. Sometimes peace is shelter. Sometimes peace is a job. Sometimes peace is money. God knows what peace is for each person. It's going to show itself in a different way for every different person. Yeah. So we just kind of have to figure out also what promises has God made us. What promises have God made to each of us? And then as we pray, remember to be in alignment with whatever those promises are, to get on board. I think that was one of the points last week, to, remain aligned, even if we don't agree. Because sometimes our desires are not in agreement with the promise that God has on our life. Our desires are a little bit different. Yeah. Thank you, God. That was, he hit me over the head with that one. Now I'm trying to change my notebook to get to the next one. Now, Esau, he sold his birthright. Let's talk about real quick what that birthright represented back then. We just talked about the promise, right? When you think about Abraham and Isaac in the Bible, I never hear people say Abraham, Isaac, and stop. I always hear Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Because that's the birthright. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. His birthright, that was Esau's birthright. Abraham, Isaac, and Esau. Now, it don't sound right because that ain't what we say. That's not what's written. Abraham, Isaac, and Esau. But he sold his birthright. That's leadership of the family was his birthright. A spiritual legacy was his birthright. But most importantly, the covenantal blessing was his birthright. The covenant that God made with Abraham was supposed to be his birthright. Abraham to Isaac. What went to Jacob? People, I can't say this with certainty, but so many people talk about Jacob the swindler. Jacob duped him, all this and that. If he hadn't sold his birthright, maybe it'd be Abraham, Isaac, and Esau. But once he sold his birthright, it just seems like to me, the rest of it, it just made it all fall in place. Like the fact that, I mean, if you've read this before, if you haven't, we're going to get into it, I think, next week. But him dressing up and putting the stuff on to get his dad to give him his brother's blessing as the oldest son, I mean, that makes sense. You sold your birthright. So you don't have a right to the blessing that the oldest son gets anymore because you sold your birthright for some beans. The principle, I didn't underline it, so I couldn't find it on the page. Don't trade the eternal for the immediate. Like, he had a birthright. He was supposed to be the leader of that family. He was supposed to have a spiritual legacy. He was supposed to have the covenantal blessing. We were supposed to see his name, Abraham, Isaac, and Esau, but it's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He traded it all for some beans. Yeah. 3 things associated with that. But God showed me as well. We really have to guard our valuables when we are vulnerable. When you're hungry sometimes, you're vulnerable, right? Let's just say you're on a diet. You're trying to eat right. If you get hungry, that will be the time where you will break your diet. So if you have not prepared appropriately, you're going to break your diet. It's going to happen, especially if you're not home. Because now the fast food game is strong and it's calling your name. For me, that 10-piece chicken nugget from McDonald's or that quarter pounder is calling my name. Or maybe even the Baconator. Yeah. I'm not going to go with the triple patty, but that double Baconator, or the Angry Whopper, let me tell you. Enemies of the diet, okay? If you're not preparing for it, if you ain't got some snacks already ready to go, some healthy snacks while you're on that diet, once you come in the house tired after working out and you know you ain't got no fruit, you're in trouble. You got to guard your valuables when you're vulnerable. I'm going to tell y'all a little story about myself. And there are some people that's probably in this world who could validate this story. I don't know if they'll ever listen to this to be able to do so. But back when I was single, living in Virginia, I had a couple rules in place so that I could guard my valuables in times where I knew I may have been vulnerable. You'll understand what I mean in a moment. I had this 9 o'clock rule where if I ever had, a lady to be at my apartment, she had to go by 9 o'clock because, just being real, I knew that if I was in my early 20s. This was like 2004. This is 2025. That was 21 years ago. I'm 46 now. You do the math. Wow. Yeah. That's a lifetime ago almost. I knew that as I got tired, my inhibitions would get, less and less. My strength and my power to resist would dissipate the later it got in the evening. So if I'm going to do something that I wanted to do but was strong enough not to do, it's going to happen the later it gets in the evening. I don't have to drink. It's the sleep that's going to make me intoxicated. I'm not going to have the strength to withstand the pressure that comes if it's too late at night and I have somebody at my place. So no, at 9:00, you're out of there. You're gone. I guarded my valuables in times where I knew I would be vulnerable. It was just a rule that I had. I didn't have an issue dating somebody, but I just had to put those rules in place because I knew what I struggled with. So it was just a rule that I had to put in place for myself. It wasn't a rule that religion put on me. It was something that I put in place for myself because I wanted to honor God with my body. I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to have sex. I wanted to reserve that. Not obviously, y'all don't know. But I had sex already, before marriage, and I wanted to do something different. I wanted to stop having sex and once, just commit to, if I get married, just not having done that. I thought that would have been great. And that's what I did. So from that moment all the way up until I got married, I didn't. So that was great. But yeah, so I didn't sell myself for some beans. The other thing is, don't sell your future for a feeling, right? Like I said, his birthright was about legacy, right? His stew that he asked for, that was about an appetite. So we have to understand what we're tempted to trade, right? We have to understand that because sometimes what we're attempting to trade will cause a compromise. It might compromise our calling. It might compromise our witness. It just might compromise who we are in general. And we have to understand what we carry. Esau didn't understand what he carried because in the end, he despised his birthright. If he understood what his birthright really was, and had he thought it through, he would have never sold it for those beans, because in the end, he despised it because wow, I just gave up why did I do this? I just gave this up. And I'm just thinking about what's to come, and I'm just playing it in my head. Wait a minute, you only got enough blessing for one? You can't bless me too? I'm thinking about what I know I'm about to read next week. Man, I can just only imagine he was distraught coming up in there just to find out that his brother stole his blessing, but he ain't steal his blessing. You sold it to him for some stew. Jacob ain't steal nothing. You gave it to him. So that was just the plot continuing to play itself out. I'll mention that again next week. But let me say that first one again. Pray that God's will be fulfilled in your family or even in your own life. And don't sell that was a part of it. Don't trade the eternal for the immediate. So that's hard too, man, because the world has so many things to offer. But I want eternity. That's what I want. I want eternity. The devil ain't got no problem taking people with him to burn and to one day perish. I want eternity. So y'all can do whatever you want. I'm trying to get eternity. That's what I'm shooting for. But that's what I got. That's what God gave me. He might have given you something different. And if you'd like to share, hit up the comments. Love to continue the conversation there. Again, my name is Alexi Johnson, and I want to thank you for watching today's chapter of Literal to Living. If this blessed you, consider subscribing so you'll be notified as new chapters drop, usually every Tuesday morning. If it's not quite for you, but you know someone else who may benefit, feel free to share it with them. Finally, it is my sincere prayer that these chapters not only help us to understand God's word, but to live it out So I'll see you next time as we continue to go from literal to living. Thanks.